Welcome to today's explainer on the Epstein files. Let's just dive right in. We're talking about a private island, a black book filled with hundreds of names, and a case file that just flat out refuses to stay closed, even years after the man at the center of it all died in a jail cell. This is the story of the Epstein files. It's a mystery that completely outlived the man himself, leaving us to untangle, frankly, a devastating reality.
Section 1. The Man and the Mystery. Wealth, Power, and Abuse. Let's look at how this all started.
To understand how this went on for so long, you really have to grasp the sheer scale of the access he had. Jeffrey Epstein was a financier, right? But he built a fortune that was heavily shrouded in mystery. Like, very few people actually understood exactly how he made his money. Yet everyone in a certain world knew exactly who he was. We're talking about a guy who counted presidents, princes, respected scientists, and massive business titans among his friends. And his assets literally shielded him. He owned a huge mansion in Manhattan, a sprawling ranch in New Mexico, and of course, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, an island that would later become infamous under a name survivors used with absolute dread.
Now, behind those extravagant parties and private jets was a chilling reality. Starting in the late 1990s and continuing for years, Epstein began recruiting underage girls. And the method? It was insidious. He'd often recruit them through other young women he had already victimized, literally paying them to bring in more. Investigators later stated that this dark pattern repeated itself relentlessly for over a decade.
Which brings us to part 2, the secret plea deal, justice delayed. How does a system this massive operate for so long? Well, there's a massive, painful gap in justice here. Let's look at the timeline. In 2005, police in Palm Beach, Florida finally opened an investigation after a parent bravely reported that Epstein had molested her daughter. Detectives uncovered more victims, and a local police chief aggressively pushed for serious charges. But then, 2008 happens. In an agreement negotiated by Epstein's elite legal team with federal prosecutors, he pleaded guilty. And it wasn't until a full decade later, November 2018, that a bombshell investigation published by the Miami Herald finally ripped open the wounds of that secret plea deal and gave a voice to the women who'd waited years to be heard.
But we really need to talk about what actually happened in that 2008 gap. Because of that deal, Epstein pleaded guilty to just 2 state charges of solicitation, one involving a minor. His punishment? Just 13 months in a county jail. 13 months! And even then, much of it was on work release. He was permitted to leave the facility for 12 hours a day. That staggering deal entirely shielded him from federal prosecution and kept the grim details hidden from the public, and most tragically, from his victims.
Part 3. Arrests and Unanswered Questions. The System Re-engaged.
So after that 2018 reporting, the public outrage was undeniable. The system was finally forced to re-engage, culminating in July 2019 when federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein again, this time on sex trafficking charges, arguing that the earlier deal did not bind them. But he never stood trial. On August 10, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Officials officially ruled his death a suicide. However, the questions around this, they've never fully gone away. I mean, how does a high-profile inmate die unsupervised? And why was he taken off suicide watch just days earlier?
But Epstein's death did not end the case, nor did it end the pursuit of accountability. His longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, did face justice. She was arrested in 2020 and convicted in 2021 for her role in helping recruit and groom girls for Epstein's abuse. She's currently serving a 20-year federal sentence for those crimes.
Moving on to Part 4, the 2026 file release, the Transparency Act.
For years after Maxwell's conviction, we only had tiny fragments to go on, unsealed court docs, flight logs, a handful of names. But the survivors, alongside members of Congress, continually pushed for the full record to finally see the light of day. And that relentless pressure actually produced results. In November 2025, Congress officially passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, signed into law by President Trump, which legally required the Justice Department to finally release the government's comprehensive records on both Epstein and Maxwell.
And the scale of this release? It's just stunning. On January 30, 2026, the DOJ made good on part of that promise by releasing more than 3 million pages of documents. Let that sink in. 3 million pages. This massive dump included thousands of videos and images, records pulled from criminal cases, the FBI's ongoing investigations, and the official inquiry into Epstein's death. Officials stated it was the largest release yet and noted it would likely be the last major one.
So what did those 3 million pages actually tell us? Well, they painted a profound portrait of just how deep his connections really ran. Emails proved that prominent business and political figures continued their personal relationships with him years after his initial conviction was a matter of public record, and the immediate fallout was swift. Some of the individuals named suddenly resigned from major institutions within weeks of the release. Plus, a draft indictment, which was never actually filed, named additional people prosecutors once believed they could have charged as co-conspirators, though it's worth noting their identities remained redacted.
Which leads us to Part 5, the fight for transparency, open wounds, and redactions.
Bringing 3 million pages to light didn't magically heal everything. In many ways, it reopened old wounds. At the heart of the controversy is this stark divide. When you look at the documents, a glaring contrast emerges. Survivors stated that their names and sensitive details appeared completely exposed in the dump. Meanwhile, well-connected men who associated with Epstein, they remained protected by heavy redactions and blacked out names in key emails. Because of this, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle argued the department had not fully complied with the law, and survivors, understandably, felt entirely betrayed by these selective redactions.
Because of these discrepancies, the fight is actively playing out in court right now. In 2026, a federal judge sided with a journalist who sued the government for withholding this crucial material. The judge ordered officials to release less redacted versions of specific documents or legally justify keeping them sealed. This targets records tied to that unfiled draft indictment we discussed, as well as emails discussing the recruitment of young women. The government is still resisting parts of that order, and litigation over what remains hidden continues today.
So why does all of this matter for us, beyond the shock of the scandal itself? It matters because this entire saga is the ultimate case study in how wealth and access can totally insulate people from consequences. It shows how a plea deal negotiated in private can shape justice for over a decade. And it highlights how survivors had to fight for years just to be believed, and then fight all over again to be protected once the truth surfaced. As the source material reminds us, transparency does not arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, forced open by journalists, lawmakers, and the survivors who refuse to stay silent.
The full picture of the Epstein files is clearly still not finished. Millions of pages are still heavily contested, key names remain hidden behind thick black lines, and the people who actually lived through this horrific abuse are left asking the exact same question today that they asked from the very beginning. Who else knew, and why did it take so long? It's a question that absolutely demands an answer.